Alrighty. Well, we're back. We're back for part two. This is our first part two.
It's just we talked too long the first time around.
Yeah, and we started really late, so we only have a little bit of time because we're actually gearing up to go re-watch Heaven's Feel 1 and 2 in theaters in
About a half
hour and 15 minutes.
give or take.
Very excited about that. It's going to be a fun experience. So let's just not beat around the bush. Let's jump right into it. Where did we leave off last week? We left.
I have no idea.
Well, I just edited it, so I
Okay.
do.
Good.
We basically left off. We just finished the character descriptions. I was going to jump into this with an episode summary, but quite frankly, running short on time. And if you really want an episode summary, just go to Netflix. They've got an episode summary on there.
That way you don't have to sit or listen to us rehash
Yeah.
38 separate episodes.
And 26
Something like that.
episodes, but yeah. So let's then let's drag a few moments out of some of our kind of favorite scenes and favorite episodes, and let's just discuss those. I alluded to what I want. One of the episodes, or two of the episodes technically, that I wanted to talk about last week were the Kiritsugu flashback episodes.
Mm.
So let's talk about those, because I think those are very important for contextualizing our protagonist. And I alluded to it last week. I said, those two episodes are the Fate Zero
Of Fate Zero.
Zero. They provide this really necessary, the show would have been fully complete without those episodes.
Well, yeah,
But I
mean,
think you would have kind of been sitting there going, I kind of want to know how this dude wound up this way.
Well, it humanizes the character really, because it's without that background, he's just a cold-blooded mercenary.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he can outthink everybody, and he is completely ruthless and highly intelligent, but you don't really have any understanding of why he's doing what he's doing, other than the fact that he's being paid.
Yeah, and then
Learning about who he is and where he comes from, kind of basically gives you a better perspective as to, why, like you said, why he is like this, and it also basically gives you an ability to, in a perverse kind of way, because not all of us have to deal with vampire zombies as kids, but some do. In a way, but it's
all right.
but it gives you some basis for him that you can at least relate to his motivation.
Yeah.
And understand that he's not necessarily one of the good guys anymore, but he's not all bad either, and there is some actual humanity behind everything he's doing, no matter how deeply he's buried it in a lifetime of atrocities.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to put it. And I also think, you get to see a lot and you get to understand a lot about how you said his motivation, but you also get to understand a lot about when Saber calls him out and says, the people like you, the way you carry yourself, the things you fight for and the way you fight for them, those qualities, those are things that are found in people who once sought to be heroes. And she correctly surmises, she's like, in your youth, your truest self wished to be a hero to save the world, did it not? And that you can just see, like, that's one of the few times in that scene, that's the only time in that scene that his kind of calm demeanor cracks just for a second, when he turns around and he glares at her, and then, like, he kind of, like, recomposes himself, and he's, like, changes the subject. And you can see how, like, why that got to him so much.
See, I kind of interpreted it as just like he's just. She did touch a nerve with him, but I think he was, he kind of thinks he was a little insulted by it, and bothered, because I think, she's trying to imprint her own sense of mythology onto his life, because she, Saber comes from a world, a highly mythologized world where there's, rules and codes of conduct in areas of life where, they are inherently without rules or codes of conduct.
Right,
and
right.
he's a realist and he understands that. And he just kind of thinks she's just full of shit.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when you learn his backstory about this, you suddenly realize, like, he's not like, Shiro or anybody like that was just like, they have this idealized, like, I choose to be a hero. He's like, he just wanted to be a regular kid with a crush on his babysitter, and everything went to shit on him that had, through no involvement of his own, that he just kind of got stuck with it.
Yeah.
And I think...
And it was his, the other thing too.
It was his way of interpreting himself as like, well, at least I'm on the team with the good guys. But he had no real idea if you were.
Yeah.
It's an easy differentiation because your opponent were these, blood crazed monsters that were eating everything around them, including trying to eat you.
Yeah.
So it made sense. But I mean, I think as he grew older and the more and more, basically assassinations he would basically commit, and then for the name of whatever greater good,
right?
At some point he realizes that, the good guys can be just as bad as the bad guys in certain situations, and Saber doesn't see that or believe it. No matter how many people's heads she cuts off, she always sees herself as the noble, saintly good guy, and he thinks she's just full of crap.
Yeah,
you're just the one who wins. That's
and Natalia's really the one who. His mentor in his flashback, she's really the one who kind of drives home this idea, like, if you go to save someone else and you die, it was all for naught.
Yeah.
And that's, and you can see the thing that starts to imprint on him as like, one man alone can't save the world, and not short of a miracle, and another important thing about him, I think that we get to see is that his whole thing comes down to, I talked about with Shiro, I talked about like what was the moment that the hero of justice, Emiya, what was the moment he was created, and we discussed that a little bit, but I think there's a moment where you see the being that becomes Kiritsugu, that seed planted, it all stems from his inaction when Shirley got infected.
Well, I mean, I think it's more like survivor's guilt. I mean, as far as
same with Shiro.
the whole thing with Natalia's, there's a classic movie called Patton from like the 1970s about General Patton and George Patton. But the opening, there's a great line in that Patton says, and he says, "No," I'm paraphrasing here, but like, no dumb son of a bitch ever won a war by dying for his country. He won the war by getting the other dumb son of a bitch to die for his country. And that's kind of the rule that Kiritsugu lives by. And when he's dealing with these, all of these mythical heroes, all of these servants that are basically pre-programmed to espouse all this mythology, he just thinks it's a bunch of crap, which is why he doesn't really use her he uses her as a decoy, because frankly, he's got no use for her.
Yeah,
he's putting real world solutions to a fantasy problem, and it's just, and I think, and I think the difference between, Shiro and himself is like when he became, what triggered it for him, that he actually like became this, is like, I think he sort of like grew into it. But I think when it finally, like, he had this epiphany that, like, I have to make some meaning out of this, is when he kind of stopped doing it when he shot the jet down. That's when he basically said, I've become a mercenary. I've just become a killer. This has to have some greater good to it. I think that's when he basically kind of walked away from that life and got in with the Einsburns and started prepping for that.
No, that was still a ways off yet, because he hadn't met Maya or anything at that point.
No, but I thought you said that was pretty much when he was wrapping it up, though.
Well, no. So based on the timeline as it's presented, during that scene where he shoots down the jet, he's probably still a couple years away from his meeting the Einsburns. It's really hard because, I have this controversial opinion, and, you sort of agree with it, but I have this controversial opinion that Kiritsugu's canonical age,
he's too young.
At the point by the time Zero rolls around, it doesn't make any sense. He's too young. He should be at least like 5 or so years older. Yeah. And, you and I are in agreement on that, but a lot of people in the community are like, well, no, his canon age is just canon age. And it's like, okay, I understand that, but like this, like,
it's when you have multiple writers,
it is because it says so, basically.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. It's like, just because you have multiple writers, writing a story at different times about the same character or overlapping, you're gonna get inconsistencies if they don't
Yeah.
coordinate well enough, and it doesn't. And that's it's a common problem of any television show.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, anybody that's watched Lost can tell you that.
Yeah.
You know, but it's
Yeah, it's just
regardless. Though I think that was the point at which he basically had his wake up call and was like, "This has to, this has to mean more." And I'm sure it's a Genesis thing, but I think that's the it didn't it.
that moment
It's not
broke
like
him.
it's not like a TV moment where you just flick a switch and like, oh, I've realized I could become a hero. And it's like
Yeah.
it's just at that point I think he's just he realized his disillusionment and started like evolving towards like at least trying to do something noble with it.
I would
He's still
say,
using
yeah.
utterly ruthless methods to do it, and probably but
Yeah, I'd say in all likelihood that probably was, um, that moment where he breaks down after shooting the jet. That probably was the moment, the last real moment where he, kind of showed his true feelings, um, up until, he got together with Irie and they raised Ilya, and like, you get to see him as a compassionate, loving, doting parent in those moments. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think that you could say that he, in that moment right after kind of shooting Natalia down, like you do have this shift in him, in his perspective, in him as a character, where he begins to kind of go from, you know oh, I need to save the world by killing all the bad people in it, to kind of understanding like what the true cost of trying to be one man up against a, you know, a basically up against human nature. He's one man up against human nature, and I think it's you have that moment where he realizes like I can't do this on my own, and I need to find a better way. And I think that's a big part of why he agreed to be the Ironsburns master, thinking, the Holy Grail can do this.
well, I think it was a matter of just at that moment he was up to that point he's kind of like just following Natalia. I mean, he kind of fell into the life through circumstance because it wasn't like he chose it. It just kind of he woke up in the middle of a horrifying situation and he was rescued from it. And there's, honestly, he was almost like a child soldier.
He was, and
for her,
in that
and-
way, like his
and-
life mirrors Maya
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah, and he was, which is probably where the root of their connection comes from. But
Yeah.
I think up until that point, he was literally just like, I'm just following Natalia doing whatever, and it's just, saving the world one hit at a time. And I don't think he was giving it any real thought as like I'm on the good guy team and everybody else is the bad guy team, and never really like kept track of what he was doing up until that point when the cost finally got so high that it affected him directly when he had
Right.
to shoot that jet down.
Right.
And I think that's the point where his evolution started. My guess would be that that's the point at which he realized that I haven't accomplished anything, I haven't fixed anything, nothing's gotten better. I have to make what
There
I'm
needs
doing.
to be
it
a
has to-
fundamental
it has to-
shift
it
in the
has
way I approach this.
No, I don't think he had that epiphany. I think he just realized that was like, it heightened his disillusionment or created it, and he's
Yeah.
just at that point he started evolving towards like, this has to mean something.
Yeah.
And I think then generally is like, he meets Maya. Who knows? It would have been honestly, it would have been a great spin-off to not even do a fate thing, to just do a Karutsugu thing.
Yeah, like
But
what they
just
did,
follow
like what they
his
did
life.
with Waver.
Just follow his life. Yeah, exactly. Just follow his life and find out like.
I still want to
about
see
all
one.
that.
I still want to see one with Archer.
Who
Emiya
knows?
Archer. I'd like to see what turned Shiro into, into Archer, like in terms of like the moment he made the deal with the Counterforce and things like that. There's so many. That's what I love about the Fate universe. Is like there's so many goddamn fascinating characters that they each have their own lives. Like I'd like to. So you really have like. You have this world where you have these characters that are just they're so interesting, and they're so interesting even on their own, and especially in the way they interact with one another. You'd like to see these, and even one character I kind of would be interested to. One character I'd kind of be interested in getting to know better too would even be like Natalia. Like she's a fascinating character in and of herself, and I think that just speaks to the quality of the writing and the character design and the world building that goes into this franchise.
Well, the thing about the show is like it's written like a TV show.
Yeah.
It's not just some cartoon with a bunch of cliches in it. It's written as a television series with actual characters. The format just happens to be animated.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have a better depth to it than you would with a lot of like more cliche like shonen anime or something like that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's really that scene where right at the end of the show, and it didn't used to bother me as much as it did, but like the last few times I've gone back to rewatch Zero, the final scene really just it tugs at something in me, and it's the scene where he's sitting on the patio with Shiro, and you see the same scene as a flashback in Blade Works, but when you see it in Zero, you get to see it from Kirutsugu's perspective.
Right.
In Blade Works, you see it and it's narrated from Shiro's perspective, and you kind of see what how he interpreted that interaction. Whereas in Zero, you get to see Kirutsugu's interpretation, and in fact, that's the moment, like that's right before he passes away, and it's like you get to see the last thing after he passes on his ideal. You could say in some ways after he passes on his curse, but after he passes on his ideal to Shiro, the very last thing that he thinks before he passes away is he recalls his conversation with Shirley, where she asks him what he wants to be when he grows up. And there's something about that moment that makes me incredibly sad, because if you recall in the flashback episode, she asks him, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he starts to answer, and then he says, well, it's a secret. I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
And she kind of says, well, I'll just stay with you until you grow up, and I'll see for myself, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But in the moment before he passes away, he recalls it differently than it occurred. He recalls, she asks him what he wants to be, and he hesitates, and then he says, I want to be a hero. And there's something incredibly sad about that to me. It's something incredibly sad that even back then, it implies that maybe he knew, maybe he had some idea that that's what he wanted to do. Even Shirley tells him, you can save the world. You can use your father's magic to save the world. And I think maybe he thought that, but he didn't fully realize it. But then when he recalls it at the end of his life, it just kind of shows, like, I think that weirdly, in a way, might be his biggest regret, is not being able to be honest with her in that last conversation they ever got to really have. And it just really fucks with me when I go to rewatch it now.
See, I think of it as more of just, it's a memory on his own part.
Yeah.
It's, what actually happened was probably more of what you saw the first time around, where he was
because that wasn't a flashback. That was just
flirting with her more than he was before. But the second time around when she asked him, I think that was sort of a memory of like, kind of what he learned.
Yeah.
Up to that point is like that's what he was trying to do. He may not have realized it himself, but he was just trying to be a hero.
Yeah.
He was trying to make up for what had happened.
Yeah.
I think the reason he flashed back to that is the fact that was really his last night, his last moment of being able to be just a normal person.
Yeah.
Everything changed after that, because after that
That's
night,
true.
he didn't see her again until she was. Just it all went to hell after that.
That's very true. And it's weird. I've never considered that before.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of why he flashed back to that. And I think the sad part of it too is even for Shiro is that, it's a little kid's promise. Oh, I'll be your hero, Daddy.
Yeah.
Things like that. And the guy's like, great. But the problem is, like, he died that night, and that was the last conversation the two of them likely had with each other.
Yeah.
So there was no way for him to raise him. Yeah, you want to have that ideal, great, but raise him
to understand.
To understand, use his own experiences and his own mistakes to teach the kid better in a real way of life, so that he wouldn't end up basically selling his soul down the road to lock himself into that thing in eternity. He basically damned himself to it because
Yeah.
they might call them heroes, but they don't get to live like that.
Yeah, but
they're servants.
I think, I gained some small amount of kind of satisfaction just from, even though at the end of Blade Works, and I know this is getting a little off the rails from Zero itself, but even though at the end of Blade Works, you do see, yeah, what Shiro becomes is inevitable in most timelines. He's inevitably going to become that. Um, but you see this moment where he's walking this line between, is he Shiro, is he Archer, which one is he closer to, and his narration basically says, I think back to that a lot. I have regrets. I have things I wish I'd done over. I sometimes wish that I had, not walked down this path, things like that. But then he says, but through it all, I know, I know now and I'll always know, although I might have regrets, the decision I made is still right. And if nothing else, and Rin even says, it's, you might be destined to be him. Um, but I don't think that Archer has walked all the way down his path yet. I don't think he's at the end like he thinks he's at. I think he's still growing and learning, and I think he'll wind up becoming, he'll wind up having his happy ending. He just hasn't yet. And I think there's a strong, it's strongly hinted that that's not just pretty words, that that's true. And I'd like to think so. And I'd like to think that, I'd like to think that Kiritsugu, if he knew the end result of everything that happened, um, it's hard to say how he'd feel about it. It's hard to say whether he'd,
I mean,
whether seeing his son become a hero is gonna really fuck with him that much.
If he'd known how it was going to turn out for him, even in the intermediate term, he would have. I think he would have basically taken steps to kind of prevent it because he got locked into the same kind of life he was in when he was alive. I mean, what's the difference between what he was doing as Archer? Just going from fight to fight to what Kiritsugu was doing when he was working for.
Well, that's the point. There wasn't a difference, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he would have if he had lived, he would have tried to teach him better. I think, when he made that promise to Kiritsugu, I think he was basically satisfied with it because he's like, oh, the kid has the right ideals at least, good moral compass. He wants to be the good guy and blah blah blah. But I think he also took it as kind of half serious as a child's promise. Felt good about himself that he at least had some success saving this kid, not just from, the catastrophe of the Grail melting down, but also that he's just, raising him to be a good person.
Yeah, yeah.
But he just never got a chance to develop that. And, the trauma of losing your only living relative, your parent, you're basically your whole center of your whole universe. You're gonna be traumatized and locked into that last ideal you had when you last talked to them.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with, I think, Shiro. Is then from that point on, he was basically just a one-trick pony. It's just hero, doing whatever he could, constantly sacrificing for himself, even at times when he didn't need to and really shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But he's just frozen. He's just frozen at that point.
And I think it's going to be interesting when we sit down. Later today, I'm going to be sitting down with Kate and probably Morgan to do Heaven's Fields 1 and 2. But next week, we're going to be having that discussion episode on Heaven's Field 3. And I think it's going to be interesting because you're going to get to see Shiro kind of take a different path from the path he takes in Blade Works. Mm-hmm. And I think it'll be interesting to kind of hear what, once we actually see the end of his journey in that timeline, it'll be interesting to see how that turns out differently for him.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's we can speculate all we want on, how it would have been and things like that. But I think to return kind of to the topic, because we're running short on time here. If we had to give if we had to give some final thoughts on Zero specifically on its own, what would you say? Who would you recommend this to? You know, what do you?
I'd say any serious fan of the medium, or even just this kind of storytelling, the sort of like, espionage, sci-fi, fantasy kind of mishmash stuff, those kind of mashups, or just people that just like the genre and to begin with. It's just a good rock solid story. It's it's sort of the foundational storyline for the Fate universe, that you actually get to watch, not counting like background.
Yeah.
But so it's a good primer for all the other ones. You can watch the other ones before you watch this one, but if you watch this one on its own,
Yeah.
you're fine. You watch the other ones, you're probably going to want to check out Zero, but you can watch this one as a standalone, and it's just on its own. It's just a rock solid story and production.
Yeah.
It's just
I'd say you can do the same thing with Bladeworks to a degree.
yeah, but you still there are some things that take place in Bladeworks where you don't understand like why, how the hell did Gilgamesh get in the middle of this and why is he mortal? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you learn about all of that. There's some extra there's an extra payoff to all of that if you go back and then watch Zero. But if you
Right.
if you want to start with Zero without knowing anything else, you're fine.
Yeah.
It's but it's just damn good storytelling, honestly.
Yeah.
It's well produced. There isn't any silliness in it.
No, there's really not.
So it's just a straight. It's just like a hard boiled like espionage show. Honestly,
Yeah.
is what I really. That's what it plays. Despite the fantasy elements to it, that's what it really plays for me. Is that it's it's a hardcore cloak and dagger kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, if I had to leave some final thoughts on it, Zero possesses none of the fluffy good times that you'll find in things like Bladeworks. It's a gritty, in a lot of ways depressing, very nihilistic show about it's a show about a man who thought he'd lost all hope, losing the last little bit of hope he didn't know he had.
It's about him losing the hope he had that he hadn't lost all hope.
Yeah.
So it's basically what it comes down to. But it's not. There are no sweet and endearing moments. There's no attempts here to get you to like, to try and get you to become fans of any of these characters.
You're not gonna be shipping any of the characters like you are gonna
you're-
spend your entire time watching Bladeworks doing. Like,
Right.
I ship, Rin and Shura are my OTP. Like, it's not. That's
I
not
don't
gonna be
know what any of that means, but I'll just assume
one
that
true
it's-
pairing. Don't
yeah,
worry
it's-
about it.
But it's all about the plot. It's all about the story. You're watching something that just as a standalone element is just rock solid. It's
Yeah.
I like it. Of all the Fate stuff, it's my favorite because it's just there's just no bullshit with it.
Yeah,
really.
and it has your favorite character in it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Yeah, so final thoughts for me. Fate Zero is phenomenal. It's phenomenally animated, it's phenomenally written, it's phenomenally voice acted, the choreography in it is incredible, the pacing is incredible. Every one of the characters has such immense depth to them, and they're so well fleshed out, and the world is so well fleshed out, and everything feels weighty and like it has real consequence to it. And I just love all of those things about it. And if I had to just kind of say, who I'd recommend this to, I think I have to agree with what you said. Anybody who's serious about, genre, about anime, anybody who's serious about, basically, if you can stomach some of the more disturbing scenes, like, any scenes with Rinosuke and Castor, basically, all the child murder, the copious child murder that's in it. If you can stomach those and you can get past them and still be able to enjoy the show, I think anybody who has any passion for action shows, anybody who has any passion for character, serious character dramas, anybody who has any passion for like even like deep philosophical shows, because at the end of the day, like as we said in part one, Fate Zero is a battle of philosophies, and I think that's what I have to kind of say about that. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, just that I would say that, like, I think you're right. It's like if you're serious about like anime, then it's definitely something you want to watch. But also, if you're just a person that likes, good like fantasy horror,
Oh yeah,
kind of stuff like that, just well told stories, and you can tolerate animation,
yeah,
then it's worth checking out. You don't even have to necessarily for this you don't something like Blade Works or the Heaven's Feel movies. If you're not into it, then you're not going to probably get anything out of it. But this is a show that, because of the way it's written and the fact that it has like 1.5 feet planted firmly in the real world, um, you can stomach a lot of the more fantastic elements about it, and you can also probably stomach some of the more, some of the darker elements to it.
Yeah.
It's animated, but it'd be an excellent story if they'd found a way to tell it live action, honestly.
yeah. I'd say definitely both Zero and Blade Works could be good introductory animes, and you know, I think they both do a really good job of defying a lot of the stereotypes that you find with anime. And I think that's why they're so good.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And, with that, it's just about time for us to leave and go watch Heaven's Feels 1 and 2 in theaters, and I am so looking forward to this. So I think we're going to have to cap it here. This was a little bit shorter, but I'm going to have like 3 episodes to edit in the next less than a week. So hopefully this one being a little bit shorter, being only about 45 minutes, hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier. But I appreciate you coming back to finish this one. I appreciate you, just talking about this with me in general. And I look forward to, I'm assuming I'll see you along with everybody else who's going to be there for at least a little bit for the spoiler cast for Heaven's Feel 3.
We'll see.
Okay. Well then, if nothing else, we'll definitely we'll be doing something again soon, and I'm gonna get that Death Parade episode out soon.
Excellent.
So, alrighty, so thank you guys for joining us. Thank you guys for tagging along in this shorter episode. If you are completely lost as to what we're even talking about, please go listen to part 1, because this is a part 2. So if you're like, what the hell? What did they? Yeah, please go listen to part 1, because I'm going to very clearly label this as part 2. And yeah. So with that said, again, thank you guys for joining us. Feel free to, like, comment, subscribe, etc., etc., etc. Follow us on SoundCloud. And, and until next time, keep watching that Weeb shit.
See ya.
Have a good one.